I'm Miriam Cates, presenter for GBNews. Big news today, 100 Labour MPs may rebel over the government's decision not to give compensation to the so-called Waspi women. So is this another Labour betrayal, or are they being sensible with the country's finances? Well, who are the Waspi women? So the Waspi Women is a campaign group, Women Against State Pension Inequality. And going back to when this controversy first arose, women who were born between 1950 and 1960 originally believed that their pension age would be 60. So when they reached the age of 60, they would receive the state pension because, of course, historically, women have received the state pension 5 years before men. In 1995, the government of the time decided to change that because it was no longer to be thought either affordable or equitable. They raised the age to 65. But over a number of years, it wasn't due to be fully enacted until 2020. So a staggered raise to the age of pensions for women. Now, the coalition government, under more financial pressure, accelerated that change when they got into power, and it brought the pension age up even further to 66. Now, the controversy here is that many of these women claim, and it affects 3.5 million women born in that decade, many claim that they were not given enough notice to make the kind of financial planning necessary to make sure they could afford to retire. And indeed, some women say that they retired and then found out that they weren't eligible for the state pension for 3, 4, or even 5 years' time. And so they launched this campaign, the Waspi campaign, to try to persuade, first of all, the Conservative government and now the Labour government to compensate these women for the loss of the state pension that they believed they were owed. Now, the difficulty that Labour has here is that many of their MPs, even very senior MPs like Angela Rayner, appeared to promise when they were backbenchers, when they were in opposition, that they would see compensation, see justice given to the Waspi women. And of course, the government has come out today and said that they won't be doing that. Now, there's huge understanding why these women feel completely betrayed by Labour. It's absolutely true that the last government kicked the can down the road. They didn't respond to the Ombudsman report that some of these women should be compensated, that they hadn't received letters in the post informing them in time of the changes. But the last government decided not to act on that, not to give any money out, not to make a decision. They left it to the new government, who have made this decision, announced yesterday that they will not be compensating the Waspi women. So, of course, these women are very, very understandably upset, not just that they won't be getting compensation, but also they feel betrayed by Labour, although they say it was never their policy to make this payout. But now we've got 100 backbench Labour MPs who also feel personally aggrieved that the government is not following through on what they believe is the right thing to do. And we may see a debate in Parliament next week, even a vote that forces Labour MP to make their mind up.
And I'm afraid to say the taxpayer simply can't afford the tens of billions of pounds in compensation when the evidence does show that 90% of those impacted did know about it. That's because of the state of our economy.
But what really is the situation? What are the morals and ethics of this situation? Well, firstly, it's inevitable. A state pension age has to rise. We have an ageing population. When the state pension was first introduced, the average life expectancy was just 65. So very few people actually had a long retirement. Very few people would have claimed the state pension for more than 3 or 4 years. Of course, that situation is transformed now. And it's wonderful that most people live on average to around 80. That's a fantastic success for the NHS, for modern healthcare system and for our lives. But on the other hand, that makes the state pension a lot more expensive and completely unaffordable if we don't gradually raise the age of retirement. And that is, of course, what the government tried to do here. We also had this inequality between the age of retirement for men and women. Now, nobody quite knows why women originally had a state pension age of 60 and men of 65. I've done a bit of digging around on the internet, and the best theory seems to be that on average, men marry women 4 or 5 years younger than them, and therefore it was designed so that husbands and wives could retire together. I have no idea if that's true. Do let us know if you have any other theories. But of course, it was an obvious first step to raise the age of women's pensions to the same as men in order to save money and introduce equality. But whilst the state pension is becoming increasingly unaffordable, is also very unfair to change the rules for people who all their working life have paid their national insurance, have paid their tax, and have rightly expected to receive a state pension at the end of their working lives. Now, of course, for people of younger generations, my age and younger, we may not get a state pension at all because it may be completely unaffordable by then. So it's a very difficult question for the government. Do they compensate these women who the Ombudsman said deserve to be compensated, who have received an injustice? Or do they look at the state of the finances overall and see that actually this country is in debt? We do have far more money going out than coming in, and this is just one thing that the government can't afford. So I have huge sympathy for the women in this situation, for some of them very difficult financial situation, and it's very disappointing for their campaign that they have not succeeded. But on the other hand, it is a difficult thing to expect all taxpayers to pay this compensation for a relatively small group of people. What do you think? Please comment below, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more Originals content.
Up to 100 Labour MPs, Jonathan, Guardian says, could, if there's a vote, which the Labour government would contrive for there not to be a vote, but the Lib Dems are saying they can have an opposition day debate.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be a binding vote.
It wouldn't be a binding vote, but it would be pretty dramatic if 100 MPs don't support their own government.
I think that, look, I think on the raw policy here, I'm in a difficult position of a political commentator by being able to see both sides and both sides of the argument. Because on the one hand, there is the argument that these women should have done financial planning if they were making big decisions about their early retirement.
Sure.
And that, given the sort of constrained budgets at the moment, sort of potentially forking out £10 billion would not be an appropriate use of public money right now. And sort of pensioners, boomers or whatever the generation that you want to call them, have had a lot of privileges that my generation will not be able to have. And so there are all these arguments. On the other hand, there are clearly women who can demonstrate an injustice here and who point out statements by various Labour figures over the years to suggest that there would be some kind of corrective measure. Then obviously the Ombudsman who made the recommendation, I think that's the key.
There was no suggestion, there was a promise by Labour, who, when they were campaigning to get into government, Rachel Reeves, Liz, Liz Kendall, and Angela Rayner, all saying these women should definitely and would get this money. Yeah, and this is a
and the Prime Minister.
You'd have thought after 6 months of lies and betrayals by this government, you wouldn't be shocked. But I'm still shocked by what Starmer has done here. I mean, he literally hates the British people. No, I'm sorry. And you said these women should have planned ahead. No, they did not know they had to plan ahead. Starmer said yesterday, completely incorrectly, that 90% of the women affected knew about the pension changes. The Ombudsman said that
the pension is going to be equalised with men.
That the pension was going to be equalised with men. The Ombudsman says that's simply not true, that 60%, only 60% knew. So you have the 40% who couldn't have planned ahead for something they didn't know was going to happen. So, so you have these women, and they've campaigned for years, and governments have tried to kick the can down the road. The Tories literally tried to kick the can down the road too. They could have paid the compensation before they got kicked out, but they didn't. And now Starmer is saying, because of the economy, which he has messed up, because he says the economy is not stable now. It was stable when he took over.
But Carol, the proposed payment wouldn't anywhere near compensate for the loss of the pension over the number of years they were expecting. They're proposing £1,000 to £2,500 per person. Now, that's not an insignificant amount of money. Who wouldn't want to receive it? But nevertheless, it nowhere near compensates for it. So therefore, the cost to the taxpayer at a time when the country is massively in debt.
It's better than nout. And if you're a pensioner and you've got no money and someone's going to give you £2,000, that's a lot of money. That keeps your heating on.